Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome back to my shop. We are ready for another live event. We are working on the joinery window, and this is a fun project because it is 6 boards and 9 different joints, everything from the simple half lap joint to the dovetail to the double mortised bridle joint, regular bridle joints, and so on. But today we're going to be doing something special, and we're going to be doing a joint that everyone kind of poo-poos or looks at funny, but it's actually a really valuable joint, and that is the pocket hole. If you talk to anyone about quality craftsmanship, rarely does the term pocket hole come up in the list. But traditionally, it is a very valuable joint because, number one, it allows the two pieces to move a bit. It gives them some flexibility. So if you have a skirt that's running around the table, underneath the tabletop, and then you attach the tabletop down, the tabletop is going to want to expand and contract over time. So if you put a pocket hole up through that skirt into the tabletop, that will allow it to move over time and still be a fairly strong joint. Now, if you build an entire case out of pocket holes, you have all of these pocket holes that can move a little bit, and that can cause problems over time with a bit of racking. But in general purposes and in the right places, a pocket hole is a really valuable thing. And on top of that, a lot of people think a pocket hole is something that's new and fangled, and especially it came out with Craig jig and all of those things, and there's no way you'd be able to do it with hand tools, when in actuality a pocket hole is something that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years and is a really old joint. As soon as someone made a screw, someone figured out how to put one in at a weird angle. So today we're going to be working on that. We have 2 joints left in this. All we have left are the pocket hole that we're going to be doing today into this piece. And then when we come back next time, we're going to be doing a miter with a spline, and that will be the last piece in this joinery window. And so if you want to follow along with this, I do have plans for it on my website. I realized today when I was doing the pocket hole that I completely drew that wrong, so I'm going to be updating the plans for the pocket hole, but I mean, it's really not something you need plans to make a pocket hole for. So if you really want that, I'll be hopefully getting that up soon. And if you want the plans, they're on my, my website, woodbywright.com. They're completely free to download, and they're a SketchUp file. So let's actually dive into this thing. First thing we have to do is take apart the actual frame. Flip over, there we go. And we don't need all these pieces. We just need this piece going into this piece. So I'm going to take this all apart in such a way that I can actually remember how it all comes together. Except for, oh my, we're going to have fun with this. The joints are really nice and tight. There we go. And I'm getting rid of the pieces that I don't need, or setting them aside. And this is usually where I get things all mixed up. But today, I'm not going to do that because I'm holding them carefully. We need to put this into this. So, in order to make this happen, the first thing that we need to do is we actually need to cut a little bit of material off of this piece, because we're going to be attaching this into here, but it actually needs to be in this far in. And I want to move it in the same thickness as this board. So rather than measuring this board and making a mark on this board, what I'm going to do is set this board on here, grab my marking knife, and I'm just going to line this end up with my fingers, make it really nice and straight and clean, hold this on here, and just do a light scratch with this. Oop, after moving the board, of course. Hold it down, light scratch. Now that light scratch there, I can grab my square and make sure that everything's the way it should be. And just making sure everything is perfect before we move on. And we are indeed. That is happy. So I'm going to make that line a little bit deeper. And then I want to carry this line all the way around, because we just want to cut the board off at that line you just created here. Let me zoom in a little bit and give you guys a little better view. So now we have that line on there. This is my reference face. I'm going to roll it over. I want to keep the fence of the square on my reference face. Put the knife into the mark, slide the square over, cut it, roll it over, put the knife into the mark, slide the square up against it, mark it, and then roll it over. I'm not going to keep it here because this side here with the tape is my reference face, so I'm going to flip the square over. So we're always keeping the square referencing the reference face. Put the knife into the mark, slide it over, mark it off. And what do you know? That line matches up all the way around the board. Nice and square and pretty. So next thing we need to do is cut that off. And I'm going to get out my bench hook and set that up. Bench hook. Clean that off. Now you don't always need a bench hook. I like using a bench hook. It just makes things a little simpler. I could put it in the vise and cut it off that way. I didn't always use the bench hook. I've used the vise for a long time, but I find myself grabbing the bench hook more and more when I need to make simple cuts. Also, I'm not making a knife wall. I could make a knife wall. There's nothing wrong with a knife wall. A knife wall makes it fairly easy to set the saw in there and have your first stroke. But I find it to be an extra step that's just not worth it as much for me. Oop,
gotta have some difference between you and Roy Underhill.
Actually, Roy rarely uses.
Is that not Roy? Did I say that?
No, Paul Sellers.
Paul Sellers. I'm learning.
She'll get them.
Hey, at least I knew a name.
Yeah. So I'm going to start. Let me make sure I'm on the second. Let me flip over to the second camera so you guys can see this a little better. I'm going to start on the side away from me, and I'm just going to nick in a little ways. Once I have the saw kind of developed, I'm going to then lower the heel and work back across the board towards my side of the board. Now that I have a nice kerf running all the way across, I can go to town. And I'm going to be eyeballing the line on my side of the board, keeping the saw vertical. I could also look at the mirror reflection in the board, and that makes it look like the reflection here in the board, if you're leaning one way or the other, the board and the reflection tends to tip up and down. And so if you keep that reflection nice and flat, you're cutting square. Slide over here to support those last fibers. There we go. And now I can check it to see I'm right on my line all the way around. That is nice and purty. We should have a nice clean cut there. Now I could come in with the shooting board and clean that up. But yeah, I'm going to hit it with the shooting board just to be sure. I think I'm just a hair off the line. I always try, I try to get as close to the line I can with, as close to the line as I can with the saw, because I like to practice being very good with the saw. I like practice having that accurate strength with the saw. But I do try to stay away from the line a little bit so that I can come back and clean it up. In this case, I'm really darn close to the line. So I think one pass or maybe two at the most with a nice thin shaving from this, and we'll be pretty good. Just need this on here. My block here is ever so slightly out of square, so if I put a little bit of material back here, that will square it out. There, see, that's what I'm looking for. That's nice and pretty now. Good, clean, flat surface all the way across. So now we need this piece into this piece. The next thing we need to do is drill a pocket hole. And for some reason, and I don't know quite why it is, whenever you work with power tools, you get into a mindset of jigs, and you get into the mindset of setting up the jig to hold the pieces in place so that the power tool can quickly run it. And so a lot of times you're setting up jigs, you're setting up fences. And because pocket holes have become kind of this ubiquitous power tool joint, we think about the Craig jig, the pocket hole jig. And traditionally they weren't, that's not what you used to create them. Basically what they would have is a drill bit that would have a flare farther up the drill bit. So you would have a drill bit the size of the shank of your screw, and then farther up the drill bit you'd have this flare, sort of like a, oh, completely mind blown right now. Someone will help me like 2 minutes now from once the light comes up. But what it would do is give you a, it would ditch out a larger area for your bit to get, for the head of the screw to get into. Basically like you see on a normal Craig jig drill bit. I don't have one of those, and I've been wanting to get one and trying to find one for a while now, but they are very hard to find, and when I do find one, I'm going to make a video about it, and it'll be something cool and big. But if you want to see what I'm talking about, I'll try and leave a link if you're not live to the channel. It's on Shannon Rogers, Renaissance Woodworker. If you type in Renaissance Woodworker pocket hole, you'll come up with one of his videos. It's like 3 minutes long, and it shows you how to use it with that bit. And it's such a quick and easy thing. You just grab the bit, you put it in your vise, and you start it at 90 degrees. Once it goes in a little ways, then you drop it down to the angle and you run your pocket hole. And it's done. No jig needed, quick and hands-free. And I'd love to have one of those, but I don't have one of those. The other way you can do it is you can grab a gouge, and you can actually go at it with a chisel and gouge and make this really nice, smooth, rounded surface. But I'm going to show you the layman's way of doing it with just a simple bench chisel. We're going to make a pocket hole with a bench chisel.
Okay, hang on now.
Okay, what have we got?
So Aubrey Kuhn asked, wouldn't it be better to check the other miter first before the shooting board just in case?
Check the other miter.
I don't know, you started talking a bunch.
Before the shooting board, just in case. I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, you'll have to come.
Sorry, you have to.
And then they said, is the term countersink?
Countersink! Hey! I knew I love this live chat. Countersink, yes, it's a drill bit, and it looks like a countersink farther back on the bit, about 1.5 inches back. And that way the drill bit, the main bit, can go in, and the main bit is like the shank of the drill. Let me zoom in here and let you see this. Because basically what happens is you need to create a way for the shank of the screw to go in, and so you want to bore out a hole slightly smaller than the actual the shank inside the threads. But then you want a little bit of a flare so that the head can slide into the wood, because you want this head completely buried into the piece of wood. So we're going to do that here. And what I need to do is just make sure, double check everything here. 1 into 9. I'm just going to pull all these pieces here and make sure that I'm putting this in the right place, because I don't want to mess this joint up right now. U into U.
But I'd love to see you fix it if you did.
Yeah. There's my cheer squad. So I'm going to put this in here. Give that a good tap. And then this will go on here. And that will lock into there. So what I need to do is put a pocket hole. For some reason, the drawing I had originally put the pocket hole from this board into this board, and I don't know what I was thinking when I made that drawing, but you generally don't want the pocket hole going with the grain. You want the pocket hole going across the grain. So if this was the skirt of the table, you're going through the skirt into the top of the table. Or in joinery like this, you'd go through the grain, so you'd actually be pinching that long grain going into the grain as opposed to going into the end of the grain. If that makes any sense. Probably doesn't, but I'm sorry. So what I'm going to do is flip this over. And the nice thing about pocket holes is they're not terribly accurate. There's nothing major about them. I just need to know where the center of this board is. And it's right about here. So I'm going to make a little mark here. We're going to get rid of all of this. And now I need to put a pocket hole into this space right here. So I'm going to lock this down. Let's see if this hold fast is one of the good ones. This hole is one of the good ones. Hey! There we go. So I've got this in place here. And what I want to do, let me zoom in and show you this a little bit closer. You know, let me move the camera over here. Give you guys a little bit better angle. You like to see my... Whoa, oh, I can't do that. Ow. Whew. Probably lost video connection there, sorry.
Okay, so I have a question while you're fixing that.
Okay.
Steve Wenner says, wouldn't you want the threads through the long grain, not end grain? Craig says to do it into the long grain.
Yes, we're going across the grain, not into the end grain, if that makes sense. At least for the head of the screw. We want the head to compress the fibers that it's going through. So it should be going through the grain, or through the long grain. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong camera. Hey, that makes better. It should be going across the grain. In other words, if the grain of your wood is running this way, you want the screw to go across it. That way the head of the screw bunches up and grabs all that grain. If it comes in from the end, then the head of the screw will actually bust out the end of the board. So you don't want it to be going with the grain, you want it to go across the grain. In this case, it's actually going to go across the grain, but then the board it's going into, and the secondary board, it's going to go with the grain, which isn't a problem because the head isn't interacting with that end grain. You just want where the head is interacting with it to be running across the grain. Sorry, I'm probably confusing even farther.
All right, so I have one more question.
Sure.
Because it wasn't making sense to me until I read it like 4 times. So from Darhu, is your pocket triangular shape or rounded? And he has the comment, traditional road workers prefer tri.
Is my pocket...
I'm assuming your pocket hole. Is it triangular or is it triangular shape or rounded with that you're going to make?
It's rectangular.
Okay.
Neither. Because with a pocket hole like a Craig jig, you're actually making a circular hole that, if you look at it in cross section, it kind of makes like this teardrop shape. Whereas if you make it with a traditional bit, like I was talking about earlier, it's kind of this weird oval shape that it makes in cross section. But we're going to do it with a chisel, so it actually ends up being a rectangle. But let me show you what I'm talking about here. So here's the board. Here's the mark I need to make. And basically I want to take this screw, and I like to get a screw like this with a big flat head. I don't like using, I don't like using flat heads that taper in like this. That taper there causes a spread, and so as this taper gets into the wood, it will actually spread the fibers apart and have a tendency to break it. Because there's so little material here, I don't want this to split it out at all. Having a head like this, a pan head, that will compress the fibers and grab them as opposed to splitting them apart like a wedge, I much prefer using these in the case of a pocket hole. So I need the slot that it's going to go into to be at least the width of the head on this screw here. So what I'm going to start with is I'm just going to make a stop mark in about 1/4 inch, and I don't care where it is exactly. I'm just going to tap it just to make myself a little bit of a line, and then I'm going to widen it out by a little bit more, and I'm going to check to see if that's the width of this head. It needs to be a little bit wider. And my light is twitching, which is kind of weird. I don't know if you guys notice it. It's driving me bonkers. So now this will be the stop. So we're going to drive the pocket hole in from this end. I'm going to take my regular 3/4 inch chisel, put it in there, just eyeball back, good whack, opposite side, good whack. And then I'm going to come in with this, remove that material in between, come back a little farther, good whack. Back a little farther again. And you can see how this would be a much faster process if I just had a drill bit to run it. But in all honesty, this may be a slower process, but often, for me at least, the slow processes are kind of fun. Especially once you get into this and you see what it looks like in the end. And so I'm going to just tap in a little bit. I don't want to hit this very hard, because if I hit this really hard running with the grain, I have a tendency to chip out or blow out this whole piece of wood over here, and I don't want to do that. So now we're in a little ways. I'm going to come in and remove some material. And I love this part. Across the grain. I don't know if I say that enough, but I love chisel work. Not as much as I love my wife, though. And they're in. They're in. And I'm going to run it down until I'm somewhere close to halfway through the board, 3/8 or so in. Just chop down the end grain, or chop down the across the grain, so you're cutting the fibers. And then do a stop cut at the end, so you don't blow out the end. And I don't know if you guys can see this. I can't move the camera around far enough. This chisel isn't perfectly up and down this way. It's actually leaning forward that way. Because the screw is going to be going at an angle, I want the bed the head rests on to be at that angle, because the screw isn't going to be going straight into the wood. It's actually going to be angled down a little bit. Let's pare this out, and this should be about it. And we'll clean this out a little bit. I'm going to show you what this looks like. Whew. So now we basically have this little slot dug out there. that we can put the screw into. So we need to put a hole in the end so we can drive this in. That material there is so thin that if I were to run the screw into that slot, I'd probably split out the fibers. So let's drill a hole for that. Go ahead and clamp this back in. Back this out of here. And I've got my egg beater drill bit, and I have a drill bit chosen that is slightly smaller than the shank of the screw inside the threads. Put that in here, right there. Move it over a little bit. And this drill bit is fairly dull, but that's okay, we're only going through a little bit of wood here. And when it blows through there, I just want to clean off all this extra junk that pops out. Not a huge issue. Some people get really worried about that. But I don't want it pushing out the piece inside. Now, let's put all that clean the bench off. Let's put this in place. Now let's hold this one down. Once that's held down, oh, this hot one gonna pop on me? There we go. Now I can bore into the end of this with less fear of blowing out, and I want to clean that out a little bit. I'm not going to go very far, just a little ways. That's about all I need. Then we can take the screw, put it in the slot, and have you ever seen a drill bit inside of a brace? Yes, you can use the hexagonal drill bits, because this is actually a Torx bit. I like Torx bits. And then we can drive this screw in. Oops. I don't have it chucked up right. Helps if that's in there all the way. And just like that, we have ourselves a pocket hole. Ta-da! Perfectly smooth, nice tight joint pocket hole. And just to show you that full speed, what it looks like without all the extra talking, I thought I would throw this over here because it looks like a really serious amount of work to do, at least in comparison to a normal pocket hole like we would think about. Is it goes pretty quickly when you just have the system. You can chop one of these out in just a matter of a minute or two or less. And it is so much fun. I don't know why, but I really enjoy it. This is the fun part right here, where you actually get to pair this out. Any questions while I'm doing this, babe?
Let's see. People Switch Up had one off topic, but says he's doing braces under some bench legs with finger joints going into the top, then half lapping across the leg. Will the finger joint hold if it's cross grain?
They're not as good. Depends on the quality of your wood, quality of the grain, and many other things. I don't like cross grain finger joints for 99% of things. So I would have to say no. But I mean, there are a few cases, but so there you go. That was a pocket hole. Just that fast, and it's done and ready to go. It's really not that hard of a thing to do at all, and really kind of fun. And I might have to use pocket holes in more things because I don't know. I really find them enjoyable. I'll have to get. I've got to find some place where I can find that bit and show you what I've been talking about, because it makes it even faster, and so much faster than using a Craig jig, because you just put it in the bit, brace and bit. You set it in at 90 degrees. You start at a little ways, then you put it down an angle and you run it in, and it's done. and literally 10, 15 seconds a hole and you're done. It makes it so much easier than setting up a jig and clamping it in place and holding everything down and then bringing out the drill and it's kind of nice.
Sound effects are.
So let's put this thing as far as we have together now that we have all but one joint in. We can do some of this. Yes, my wife married me for my sound effects. I'm going to have to take that out to put this in. I'll have to do that later.
It wasn't for them. No.
So, yes. So we've got all of these except for this last corner to do here, which we will do next week, and we will have this done. And I haven't quite figured out what I want to do for the next live. I'm thinking about doing a stool, and actually taking that through the entire process and having a couple months worth of live videos where we build the stool entirely live with a few options. So let me know your thoughts on that. So we have one more in this, and then we're going to come up with that. So 26 minutes in, you can tell that this is a really easy joint, especially with how much talking I did ahead of time. In comparison to some of the other joints, this is a fun one. So next time you have someone who's dissing pocket holes, don't do that. They're actually a very useful joint. Yes, there are other ways to do it, and I usually try and do things without using hardware, but there's nothing wrong with them, and they're a very functional, usable joint, so don't be afraid of them. What questions we got?
Okay, well, they said they want your table build to be part of the live.
And maybe I will.
That would give you a really good opportunity to see how James fixes his errors.
What errors? I have no errors.
Anyways.
Yeah, I'm hoping. Well, I really originally was going to want it done in the month of July, but I'm doing up a couple things for August, not April. So I don't know how that will come out. Sorry. What you got?
You're fine. Let's see.
Wood curls.
Jose Martinez Jr. says, is there a way to do this without some really good chisel skills? I know mine are limited, but then other people were saying it's super easy.
Yeah, this is not complicated chisel skills. This is about as basic as it gets. So this, especially with this process, because the end of the slot, you're chopping with the grain. And that's probably the hardest part because you don't want to hit it too hard. You just want to drive it a little bit so you don't split out the grain. For the going along this slot, then you can chop into it because you're sliding across grain. That's a good way to learn how to create your stop cuts. And then the pairing cut, removing the waste in between, is really easy because you're cutting across the grain. So it's a good intro into how do you pair with a chisel. So that'd be a great basic project for learning how to use a chisel and how to hold a chisel. Yeah, this would be a good beginner project.
All right. Doug has another question that's a little off topic. Says, just finishing up my brass hinges and I'm looking at the panel they will be going on. They're too long for my shooting board. Any suggestions on cleaning them up without making a longer shooting board?
Sure. A shooting board is just a jig. It tries to guarantee 90 degrees, but as I showed you with mine, because of a problem I have with it, I knocked it out of square. I'm going to have to address it. And so it's only as accurate as what you need. When I do big panels or larger things than my shooting board, what I'll do is scribe a line. So I'll use a square or whatever I need to mark my line, and then I'll set it up in it so that if the grain's sticking up this way, then grab my plane and plane the board. The end grain sticking up, and I don't go all the way through, so I'm not splitting out the grains on the other end. And I just be careful to go down to that line. And once I hit that line, then it's square. It's done. And so it's not something to really overthink. It's just if you are getting close to that line, then slow down and hit the places where you're farther away from that line. Until you hit that line, then don't plane anymore at that spot where you hit the line, and just plane where you haven't hit the line yet. And just take it down to the line. Don't overcomplicate it. And maybe practice on another piece, but it's not that hard of a thing to do. The nice thing about a shooting board is it's set at square, so it's just quick and easy. You can trust the shooting board to tell you when it's square as opposed to the line to tell you when it's square.
All right. Let's see. Oh, someone was asking about. Oh, Abercoon. Would a triangular pocket hole be just 2 chisels cut in like a V with the end paired flat?
Sure. Yeah. So rather than like, and I cut down a wall here and a wall here, and then paired out flat on the bottom. If you cut down an angle this way and an angle this way, sure, you can do that. The whole reason I do hand tools is not to do replica woodworking or historical woodworking. It is to have fun. And so for me, that pairing out in between, that's the fun part. And so everything else is just getting up to that. And I love making these cross-grain curls that come out of that pairing. These make my day. And so that's why I prefer to do it that way. I mean, if I'm really looking for the quick and easy, then I'll get a bit to just run in and drill it out. But I'm doing it for these.
All right, so let's see.
Whatever makes you happy, I guess.
Duck says, tell James you can do pocket holes where you drop in a wooden peg, not screws.
Sure. Yeah, that's...
I think there.
Yeah. The only thing about it is that if you're then going cross-grain, pegs don't have quite as much flexibility as a screw does, whereas a screw is hard enough so when it's moved back and forth, it's not going to shear or cause any problems. It just kind of wiggles around in the joint. Whereas a peg is something that is softer, and so the peg can deform or break. So I wouldn't use pegs for tabletops. Screws are actually really good for that. But if I'm going to use a peg joint, then I'll probably, rather than coming at this from an angle to put a screw in, I'll probably just come in from the end and run a screw all the way through it. But again, personal preference.
All right, let's see. Benjamin Binus asked, how thick does the table have to be to support those bench hooks?
To support bench hooks? It depends on what the material is. My old bench is 2x4s, pine 2x4s. It's after I plane them down, it's about 3 1/4 inches thick, and it works great in those. The pine is fantastic. I'd probably do it in a pine bench down to maybe 2 inches. 2 inches would probably work fairly well. I mean, you can do it in thinner, like 1.5 inches, but it will widen out the holes really quickly. In hardwood, you could probably do it down to 1.5 inches without much problem in oak. My top right now is 4 1/4 inches thick, which is a bit too thick for them. So I actually have to make the holes a little bit bigger in order for them to make them work. So the butter zone is usually around 3 inches for both hard or softwood. But you can do it on thinner woods. And if you do have a thin top, like a lot of people have like 1.5 inches thick construction lumber, all you have to do is glue another piece underneath where the hole is at, or even screw another piece underneath where the hole is at to make it 2 boards thick at that point. So I know quite a few people who will run a 2x4 underneath their dog holes, glue and screw it underneath, and then put a hold fast through that. So they're going through the 1.5 inch top as well as the supplementary 2x4 underneath.
Oh, I thought I was going to sneeze. All right. So several people have chimed in, but Tim Cheatwood had the idea. Do a build live with me where you post a materials list on your Instagram before you start the live stool build.
A live with me build. That would be kind of interesting. And actually, have that would be kind of fun. I might have to think about that. Thanks for the idea. And do especially if I were to post it, a couple weeks ahead of time and have the materials for the seat, and then each week I can tell what you'll need for that particular week and tools needed for it. It might be fun. I'll have to think about that. It'd be a lot more planning, but I think it would be an enjoyable thing. So thanks for the idea. I have to think of that.
All right. Timothy Hall says, happy little pocket holes, like Bob Ross.
Yes.
Curtis Harmon had, did you ever get a chance to show some love to the old Sergeant plane?
I don't know which Sergeant plane you're talking about.
All right, Curtis, you gotta clarify.
I have, actually, are any of mine sergeants? Oh, none of mine up here are sergeants. I thought I had one up here that was a sergeant. Apparently not. I'm pretty sure I have a couple ready to restored. Soon I'm going to be doing quite a few restoration videos because I'm planning on doing a semester with Shannon at the hand tool school about tool restoration. So I'm working on that at the moment. But I'll probably be restoring it. Oh yeah, I picked one up at the Midwest Tool Collectors National Meet. I think that's what you're referring to. No, I haven't gotten to that one yet, but I will.
All right. Let's see. Oh, Curtis said he mailed it to you a few months back. Don't look at me.
Curtis, email me, because my brain is completely flat on that one. I probably have it and just not thinking about it right now. But
All
yeah,
right,
contact
Curtis, let us know. Way to catch him off guard, man. All right, Duck says, the missus wants to know...
I've got enough things going on in my brain right now.
You're very off today. The Duck says, the missus wants to know if I can just use files on my panels, as they are the front and back of a wooden wedding album I'm making.
Files on your panels?
For a wooden wedding album.
I don't know what you're talking about. Files are actually a really good way of getting the final work on it. Like a lot of times if I'm doing an organic shape, I'll use a rasp and file and get finer and finer files until I get to the really fine files, and I'll actually finish the wood with a file or a light float. They do really well. So yeah, files are good woodworking tools. Probably doesn't answer your question though.
Mm-hmm. All right, hang on. Let's see. Duck's got lots of questions tonight. What happened to the live teaching Mrs. Wright woodworking?
Yes, we're thinking
I didn't know we were doing it live.
I don't know if we'll be doing it live. We might do some of it live.
Well, they're used to mistakes.
Right now, during the month of August, I'm going to be trying up a new video format with a friend of mine coming over to shoot videos. And then hopefully during the month of September, we will start doing a series with beginner woodworking with my wife. So I think that'll be kind of fun. I don't know if they'll be live. We might do one or two lives. But then who's going to man the chat?
Person to run the chat, yeah. Let's see. Do you have any plans or desires to experiment with things like upholstery, gilding, or other types of antique style ornamentation?
Not really. I've done some upholstery in the past. I have to say that I someday would like to build like a craftsman style armchair with a leather seat. I think that would be kind of fun. But any particular plans? No. But who knows? The future might hold. So, yeah.
All right, hang on, I'm getting caught up.
Oh, files on the end grains so that they're not rounded, not using the hand planes on the end, on the edge. Sure. Sometimes if your files aren't really sharp or they're kind of old, the end grain can be really difficult and it kind of bounces around on the end grain. But if you have a good sharp file, end grain, no problem. Usually gives you a nice good finish. Uh-oh, my wife breathed in.
People's Woodshop says you can run the chat while she takes your place.
That'd be fun.
Yeah. I'd still be caught up on the reading. No, I'm teasing. Let's see. Judith Katz says, didn't they used to use a gauge rather than straight chisel? And then apparently your voice was out of sync.
A gouge.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, you could use a gouge. There really is no traditional way to make a pocket hole because there are so many different ways to do it. A gouge is a great way to do it. Rather than chopping in one side, chopping out the other side, and paring out the middle. You just come into the really tight gouge and run it down. So you choose a gouge that is the same radius as the head of your screw. Yeah, works great. I don't have a gouge that's that tight of a radius. I have one that's smaller than the radius, and I have one that's bigger than the radius. Different ways of doing it. I like that final pair out and having the flat bottom, so that's my choice. The other thing I was thinking about that having that square shape is it would make it very easy to fill that if you wanted to, because then you would have something that's a specific width by a specific depth, and so you could make a square peg very easily at that size, jam it into place, and then plane it off flush, and you could fill the peg really easily. Whereas if it was a rounded surface, it is harder to get a peg to stay in that slot. Or if it was a V, it's harder to keep something that stays in there. You'd have to glue it and have it set in there right. Personal preferences.
All right. Steve Alderson says, hi, big fan of you. Can you do a video on how to make a dove saw?
A dovetail saw? Actually, I want to do a couple different videos on making some saws, because I want to make a new tenon saw. Because, I mean, the Veritas saw is okay. Don't get me wrong. It's actually a really good saw, especially for the price. It's phenomenal. But I want to make my own. And something kind of that goes along with and matches the Bearcat dovetail saw. So I don't think I'll make a dovetail saw because I have this one. But if you make a tenon saw, you can do the exact same thing. You just make it smaller. But then I also want to make a halfback saw. So it's kind of like a smaller panel saw. So something that's about that length. And then it has a brass back that's like 4 or 5 inches long here. So that one's on my list as well. But down the list a ways. With a lot of other things. Yeah, because the video is live, some people will actually be getting slightly different feeds. So some people, my voice might be completely in sync, and some people it might be out of sync. I'm pretty sure it's like 3/100ths of a second out of sync. I've got to dial it in a little bit better, but it should be pretty close.
All right.
It's fun live.
Tim Clown wants to touch base with you about your card scrapers later.
Cool. Yeah, send me an email.
You can't get on your website on its phone, so let's see. Marcos Ricardo says, hey, if you use a pocket hole specific drill and use it starting upside down and then tilt it, it would be faster, easier, and still hand tools only.
Yes. The only problem with it is it doesn't have a lead screw on the bit, and so it has a tendency to wobble around a little bit. The traditional bits actually have a tiny lead screw like you find in your auger bits. And so that lead screw actually digs into the wood, and so when you pivot it to the angle you want, it holds into the wood very well and makes that transition easily. Whereas using like a Craig jig bit, it tends to wander around a little bit while you make that angle, and that can be a bit annoying. So yeah, you could use one of those. I just like using a chisel, so stop annoying me. No. There are hundreds and hundreds of ways of doing it, and there is no right or wrong way, and that's why everyone's got to find the way that you like to do.
All right. Let's see. People's Woodshop says, what is the Rust-Oleum paint you use? He got some for his planes, but they still feel tacky after a couple of weeks. Not sure it's the best for tools.
My question would be, did you shake the can enough? But no, I don't have a can out here. I just got the Rust-Oleum enamel metallic blue. The cheaper one. I think it was like $4 a can. And it's not the most durable paint. I mean, there are chips and nicks and things like that, but it's actually holding up pretty well. There aren't very many nicks.
All right, let's see. Santos Tejeda asks, are there any marking knife and marking gauges that you would recommend?
Marking knife is a very personal question. Everyone has the marking knife that they like, and there are so many different types and styles, and double bevel, single bevel, reusable, like the Paul Sellers uses that Stanley extension knife. Some people really like the Japanese, Kiridashi. There are all sorts of different types. And so best thing I can say is experiment and see what you like. This one was made for me by Dan the Maker Man, another YouTube channel. You should definitely go take a look at. He's made a few in the past, different ones for different people. And I just absolutely love it. I like having the longer shank that is thinner so I can use it as a reference surface to mark things off of. I really like having that. It's about 2.5 inches of flat surface on the single side bevel of it. So this is like exactly what I want. That's the knife I like. But not everyone likes that, so you really got to experiment and play with it. As to marking gauges, it really depends on where you find them. One of them that I use probably more than, well, I use this traditional Stanley, well, not really traditional, but it's a, bring this over here. Woo, there we go. This is just a Stanley marking gauge, really simple. You can find these at a lot of antique places. Midwest Tool Collectors, you'll find a half dozen of these or so. They're usually $5 to $10, and it's just a simple thing. Loosen the nut, slide it over, crank it down, and it's good to go. I really like those, but then I also use this one, which is from Harbor Freight, and this is actually a mortising gauge, so it has the 2 pins on the top here, and 1 pin underneath, and it's very much the same thing, loosen, tighten, but then it has the second thing for sliding the second pin on the mortising gauge. And I probably used this one almost as much as the other Stanley. This one costs like $10, and not bad. And you can buy it at just about any Harbor Freight. So I'd say this would be the first go-to one if you're going to have one, but you can never have enough mortising gauges. So hope that answers your question.
All right, let's see. People's Woodshop said he shook the snot out of it, but it's still leaving fingernail marks.
Yeah, that sounds like there's a problem with the paint. Take it back to the company. Yeah, that's not good. Mine's touchable within 45 minutes.
All right, so Andreas Henning says, greetings from Uruguay. He'd be interested in a tenon saw build as well.
Cool. Be a fun one to make. And it's kind of a thing that looks really scary to make. But if you break it down, they're not that difficult. It's a kind of organic shaped handle that fits well into a slim piece of metal with a bunch of notches in the bottom, and then a piece of brass with a slot cut into it. Relatively speaking, it's not a complicated build, but like a guitar where a lot of people look at it and go, ooh, if you take it step by step, it's not that hard.
All right, Duck on.
Not that complicated.
Duck wants to know, do you have any plans for using any metal in any of your future projects other than screws?
Tenon saw? I find one of the challenges that I really like is building things without hardware. I find that to be a limitation that I enjoy. So it's one that I'll regularly put into my projects of building them without hardware. I will be building a cabinet here soon. That'll be with for Shannon Rogers' class that I'll be working on with him. And I'll have hinges on that. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have any. Well, other than I'm building chisel handles here soon, so I'll be using the steel for the chisels. But yeah, I don't use a lot. I don't use a lot of screws. I don't use a lot of hardware. If I can get away with not having to use it.
Our dresser had handles. That was about it.
Yeah, and I made the stops in the back steel, but I don't get to look at those. They're against the wall, so it doesn't bother me as much.
So Stephen Alderson had asked, how can I stop my tools from rusting? There were a few suggestions thrown out, but curious what you had.
I don't have as much of a problem with it because I'm in an air-conditioned shop, and so I don't have a humidity problem down here. But usually, like my planes, the soles and sides, I'll run them over a block of paste wax that I made, and I'll use this to, number one, lubricate them. Same thing as the saw blades. I'll run this across them to lubricate them, but then this also helps with the rust prevention. Oils oils and tallow, lamb fat are the traditional ways. But other than that, it's just being repetitive about it. If you're in a really humid condition, once a month, once every other month, go through all your tools and oil them down. it's a pain, but that's about it. And there are some store-bought things that you can get that do better, but I've never used them, so I'm not the best person to answer that. So, yeah, for some people, it's a struggle. It's real.
All right, and then Angel Grant says, "Where can I find drill bit sets for my hand drill?"
I usually find them at most antique stores and estate sales and swap meets. I'll find someone who has a bucket of auger bits, and 70% of them are bad, but you dig through it and you'll find one or two that are good. Finding a full set is a hard thing to do. You can buy a new set of Irwin on Amazon for like $80, but everyone I've talked to who's gotten it said they're trash, so I would not spend the money. You can buy good new auger bits for like $35 a piece, but who wants to spend $35 on an auger? The couple sets I have either been, one of them was given to me as a present, and my big set, this one I bought at a Midwest Tool Collectors meet, and this has made my day. So I think I paid $45 for this, which was a steal. But my wife is laughing, so I should probably find out what that's about.
People's Woodshop says, "There you go, James. Next live video, rendering lamb fat. Of course, you have to kill the lamb with the bow and arrow you make yourself."
Yes.
There would be hardware because of the arrow, unless you really had, very sharp tip of just wood.
No, bare hands. I strangle the thing. I tear its hide off with my teeth. Yes. I'll leave that one for other people. I get my glue from dog toys. That's about as close to the animals I get.
Yeah, we don't have any.
Unless you count our kids.
Yeah.
Might have to make some glue out of them one day.
This turned very dark all over. Oh, dear.
How are you doing?
Stone arrowhead, there you go.
Yeah. Now, it's actually one of the projects I want to do one of these days is go off into the woods and nap a chisel and build something out of a piece of wood I find in the woods with the chisel I made. So walk into the woods with my own bare hands and build my own tool, and I think that would be kind of fun, but someday.
All right.
What are you thinking?
I'm trying to read this statement. It says, Aubrey Kuhn says, "I'm going to be making a 3 TPI bow ripsaw from a bandsaw blade, parentheses blade fixed at a 45-degree to frame soon. Do you think there's a sweet spot in how long to make it for cutting speed without getting unwieldy?"
Yes. So like a big frame saw, like my frame saw back here, I like somewhere around 32 to 36 inches. I find that to be about the perfect throw strength for one person. Anything longer than 36 inches, and I find it just kind of wasted space for one person. If you have two people, then you can go a lot longer, and it actually flows fairly easily. But yeah, for me, 32, 36 inches. Unless you're intending on ripping something regularly that is more than 15 inches, then there's really no reason to go longer than that, personally. Though you will find people who will tell you otherwise. So if you think bigger is better, then 48 inches would be a fantastic saw.
That's a big saw.
What?
It's a big saw.
Yeah, this one is, I think this one's 36.
Well, you got to remember, that that's only 10 inches shorter than me.
Yeah.
My perspective's a little...
Cool.
Yeah.
Are we done with them? Are there any more?
Besides them continuing on the killing the lamb thing, no, I think we're Silence of the Lambs would by right edition.
Cool. Well, we have one more week where we'll be working on this beast, and we are going to be having some fun. So if you want to come back for the last one, where we'll be doing the splined miter joint, and we'll be wrapping up our joinery window. So guess that is about it for today. If you have any questions that I didn't get to, leave them in the comments below, or feel free to send me an email. You can find that on my website. But that's about it for today. Until next time, have a wonderful day.
Bye.
See ya. Oh, you're waiting for it.
I know.
She's clicking the button now.
I can't get
She's
my mouse
finding
to
it.
work.
Where's the button? It's gone. The button's missing.
Where's
Oh
my
no!
mouse?
What's gonna happen? She can't find the mouse. The mouse is over here. The mouse is
There
over
you
there.
go.